Good afternoon, everybody. This is Purple Update Live. I am your host, Joe John. What is going on, everybody? Thank you for joining Purple Update Live the day after. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of purplePTSD.com and VikingsTerritory.com. If you were on the other stream, I apologize. I honestly thought it was going well. I've spent a lot of time troubleshooting that laptop, and I plugged it directly into the modem. And it wasn't cutting out on my end the way that it had been, but apparently it was laggy and the volume sucked. So I give up. I'm going to have to return my laptop, something I really didn't want to do. I just bought it on Monday. But I have a 15-day grace period, so that's good. I hope that I have an e-receipt or something, though, because I have no idea where the receipt went. Anyway, again, I apologize for that. That's not what it's embarrassing. I'll say that's why my cheeks are rosy, but I think it's because it is 1,000,000 degrees in my apartment. But I was essentially transitioning from talking about the NFC playoff picture after this weekend to some more Vikings related topics. So I'll just rehash that, which is great because I was clearly looking at my notes and I didn't feel too comfortable about that. So clearly, my brain just broke. So let's get back into it. There was a lot of football this weekend. The Eagles are playing tonight, if I recall correctly, which has some impact on the NFC playoff picture. But let's go through the top 5 seeds, as the Vikings are the 6th seed still. The 49ers faced the Saints in a game that can be dubbed as an instant classic shootout. They just ended a really, really rough gauntlet of 3 games between the Packers, Ravens, and the Saints. They were 2-1 in that space. And over the weekend, we talked about Over the weekend, we chatted with you guys about things like what team would you want to face the least in the NFC Championship? What team do you think is going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl? Outside of the Vikings, because we know that pretty much all you guys would say Vikings, even if you didn't believe it, because you don't want to lose that sweet, sweet internet cred. My answer was the 49ers for a few reasons. One being they're battle tested, and they've played a lot of the good teams that are there, if not all of the good teams that they're gonna potentially end up facing in the playoffs, and they've won most of those games. So that's a little scary. There's just the unknown there, outside of the 49ers, the Vikings have played the Seahawks, and while they've lost 6 in a row, Russell Wilson's had some of his worst games of his career against the Vikings. Actually, the worst game of his career was against the Vikings, and that was last season. The Vikings also played them relatively well, and outside of a quarter of football that is, I'm dubbing the worst quarter of football in team history without really thinking past the last couple seasons, the Vikings very easily could have won that game. Should have won that game. Debatable, but you get what I'm saying. The Packers, there's a few reasons why I don't fear them. A, they're the Packers. B, the Vikings should have won that game. They came out extremely flat on defense. They had a backup cornerback playing that was getting picked on by Rodgers, who wouldn't be playing. Outside of that, to be fair, I mean, they were implementing a new system. It was their second game. Rodgers hadn't played a down of football in the preseason, so he was still learning on the fly, essentially. And so I'm assuming they're better, but at the same time, and I've said this before, so I apologize for being repetitive, they are coached by somebody who is an acolyte of Gary Kubiak. I'm going to turn so you guys can see other parts of my background. Matt LaFleur runs a very similar style of offense, and that's not a coincidence, as the Vikings, or at least as Kubiak would if he were solely the offensive coordinator. You might think that benefits the Packers as well, but the Vikings are doing a mix of the Kubiakian stuff with Stefanski, so there's an edge there, and it's a teacher-student situation, in that Kubiak is the master, and he knows everything about his system, obviously. So I would take Kubiak over LaFleur, even though sometimes, like if I was making that argument about somebody who was basically doing like a Neo Air Coryell system that they learned from Norv Turner, I would take that person over Norv Turner because I think he's a little bit more. And I'm picking my nose, so I'm moving the cam. See, no one even noticed. Yeesh. Today's show's not going at all the way I wanted it to. Randy says the first quarter against the Packers was the worst, but we shut them down after that. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that they were. 1 second. I think that they were still learning that system, but I would take again Kubiak's ability to identify and shut things down over what they've learned since. I mean, we also have to look at the fact that the secondary is not playing as great as it did the rest of that game, but as I mentioned, we were hurting at corner, and Rodgers really took advantage of that early in that game. So yeah, I would love to play the Packers week 1, week 2, or in the NFC Championship. That would be great. But yeah, the 49ers, I mean, despite the fact that they have the number 1 seed, there's only 3 games left. They still haven't even locked down a playoff spot or the division. They could still lose the division. I'll tell you how in a minute. But they are the number 1 seed. The Packers are the number 2 seed. A lot of people, not just me, and I'm not just making this up, are calling them frauds. If you go to Bleacher Report, where a lot of our stuff gets posted, I saw on the they do this like nice updated NFC playoff picture tweets with like an image, and it looks all fancy. The top comment, upvoted comment, was it just said the Packers are frauds. People are saying that because of games like yesterday, where they won by 5 points at home over the worst team probably in the NFL, at least one of the worst teams, with a rookie quarterback who is really talented, but most people are saying is a project. They just don't have that championship feel to them. I fully expect the Vikings to handily defeat them the week after next. The Saints are the 3 seed because they lose the tiebreaker to the Packers because the Packers have one more win in the NFC conference than they do. The Saints, in terms of like their chances of moving up or down a spot, this is all really fluid, right? Like things could really change here in the next couple weeks. The Saints only have an 8.2% chance of ending up in the first round, or of being the number 1 seed when everything is said and done, and basically a 50-50 chance of being the 2 or the 3 seed. So, I mean, I guess it depends on how good you guys think the Saints are. For my own heart health, I haven't watched a lot of Saints games this year. Even when Teddy was at the helm, maybe just to protect myself from the feels of the Teddy situation. But I think they are a really good team. I think they are built to win a championship. I would hate to see that. I really would. As much as I hate them, though, I do like Drew Brees a lot. I really wanted the Vikings to get Drew Brees. I know that a lot of people were concerned about his shoulder at the time, but there was even a connection in the front office to Brees from his time at Purdue. So it was really rough to see him go, because as a team that has struggled to find a franchise quarterback my entire life, which is a plug for the article that I wrote today on Vikings territory. Think of all the success the Vikings could have had. Things would have been different. Draft picks would have been different. But man, if we would have had Breeze this entire time, yeesh. The Cowboys are 4th. They're garbage. They've lost 3 games in a row. I don't know how the Eagles haven't overtaken them. I think if they win tonight, they would be a game or a half game behind for breaker purposes, the Eagles from the Cowboys. But the only thing I really have to say about that is the Cowboys are making a strong case for changing the NFL's seeding system and playoff system to one that follows what the NBA does, which kind of eliminates the conference or division champion from an automatic seed in the playoffs. It's more just based on your overall wins and losses. I'm not as gung-ho about that as other people. I'm not 100% for it because I do like having that representation, and I do like the idea of having divisions and fostering rivalries and so on and so forth. I think that it could have ancillary consequences, but if a 7-9 team ends up making the playoffs, or even a 6-10 team, let's say, and there's teams like the Bears who could have 10 wins and not make it, I can see why that would piss people off. I remember when the Patriots were 11-5, they didn't make the playoffs. Hey, Tang, thanks for letting me know about the connection. I don't know what the problem is. I really don't. I'm on the same internet right now that the laptop is on. I thought it was because it was continuously kicking me off. I wasn't getting kicked off today, though. I thought things were going great. I was super excited. I was even showing off my fancy mic. Ugh. Story of my life. And the Seahawks are the 5th seed, but they still can win the NFC West, which is interesting if they win all 3 of their final games. Because one of those games is against the 49ers, and they would have the tiebreaker. So who knows how the season's going to end. This is, and maybe it's because the Vikings are involved more, so I'm more paying more attention to it. But this feels like one of the more competitive NFC playoff pictures I've experienced, or we've experienced in recent years. It seems really up to the final minutes of the season esque. So we'll see what happens. It's really interesting. But I've said this on the show multiple times, but I'm the type of guy that, I guess, in terms of sports, or maybe if you ask my girlfriend just in general, is never happy. When you see a win like yesterday, which wasn't a super emphatic win, I mean, they didn't blow them out of the water. They didn't need to. I think Cousins attempted 2 passes in the 4th quarter of this game. But when you see that, it gets you to thinking, man, especially with how tight things are going to be and how the Rams are still a game behind the Vikings and the Bears are still alive technically, although their chances to make the playoffs really got effed in the A yesterday. I look back and think how close some of these games were that they lost. What those could have meant. I mean, it was the same kind of situation last year with not making a win-in situation, you lose, and then you think, well, if Daniel Carlson would have made those field goals, but in retrospect, I mean, does it really would have mattered last year if they made the playoffs or not? I mean, I'm kind of surprised that in the way that everyone talks about 2018 being this big cluster, that they were actually at the point of a win-in in the final week of the season anyway. You know what I mean? I mean, sure, it was a gigantic disappointment regardless because they were in the NFC Championship the year before, and you pay all this money for Cousins and so on and so forth. But, I mean, when you write articles about it, like I have been, people treat 2018 like it was the 3-13 Leslie Frazier years, and it wasn't, you know? They weren't even a sub 500 team. So I think that's just because people. Sorry, I'm trying to. There we go. I think it's because people just have such high expectations, and by people I mean writers, fans, but the team as well. And this team generates so much passion because they have such a high ceiling, and there's so much potential. And I think all of us know that. If you look at position by position, there's no team in this league that is as talented as this Vikings team. And the good news is that they've done a lot of good things this year, and a lot of those good things have come without arguably their best player on offense. And that player is Laquan Treadwell. I'm totally kidding. That player is Adam Thielen, and it sounds like, knock on wood, Thielen is going to be back for the Chargers game, and that's not a game you can overlook. I could see it. I don't want to call it a trap game because they're not a terrible team. They're 5-8. They don't really have any support from their fans. That doesn't have anything to do with how good they are, but it kind of does. They have a really good 1-2 punch at running back. They have a savvy veteran quarterback, so on and so forth. They beat the Packers a few weeks ago. They have that going for them. And so the Vikings can't overlook them. As tempting as it would be, with the Packers and the Bears being their final two games. It's also the last road game of the season, but it should feel like a home game, right? Because of all the purple and gold down in the Los Angeles area. My uncle, may he rest in peace, was part of the Southern Minnesota Vikings Fan Association way back in the day. And I know a few of our writers, a former podcast partner of mine, Luke Braun, who now hosts Locked On Vikings. He's down there. There's a few really great Vikings bars. But it's going to be a tough game against the Chargers. We'll get into that as the week goes on. But it is really relieving to hear that Thielen's going to be back. I hope to God that he is rested and that the hammy is in a good spot. You know, if it flares up again, that could be the end of his season, and we really might need him. Sean Borman wrote an article yesterday after the game talking about the quarterback rotation that Zimmer implemented. He talked about it. I'm encouraged by that because the biggest thing that I've been worried about going into the playoffs, obviously, is the same thing that a lot of you guys were worried about, which is Xavier Rhodes and what you can do to fix the secondary. We saw Rhodes on the sideline to start the game yesterday, and we talked during the week whether or not Zimmer would have, whether it's the balls or the lack of stubbornness or just the openness, I guess is the better way to put it, to start a quarterback rotation to get Hughes and Holton Hill out there, maybe even Chris Boyd, before the playoffs, because you're going to have to rely on those guys at some point, and you might as well give them as much experience as possible leading up to it. And it kind of got screwed up yesterday because Hughes had an injury, which turned out to be an oblique injury. I think he'll be fine moving forward, but I think we would have seen even less Xavier Rhodes yesterday if not for that. So I'm encouraged by that. Can Rhodes still maybe come in when needed and contribute? I think so. But at this point, you can't rely on him, period. So I'm very, very, very relieved and happy that they did go to that rotation, because I think that is going to really move more the needle towards less and less Xavier Rhodes until essentially the end of the season, and then I'm assuming they're going to let him go. It's not working. Tank says that the Rams are the Seahawks' kryptonite. Yeah, that is true. It is also true that they looked really tired yesterday from all the by all I mean the one article that I read about it. It was a short week. Maybe the Vikings wore them out. We can take that as a positive, but they weren't playing at their best. But yeah, they seem to struggle with the Rams, which is to be expected. Division games are always hard. Randy Stone says our window of opportunity will not remain open. We have to make some noise in the playoffs. That's a really interesting take, and I agree with it. I'm really astounded it stayed open this long. It's really not what I'm used to, and not what, I don't know how old you guys are. It would be interesting for me to know that, Tang and Randy. If you don't mind putting that out there. Man, Randy, your comments are on fire. Tang's always on fire, and you're always good too. But man, I'm glad you said them, because I'm not gonna lie, the agenda for today's show was a little light, if you couldn't tell. But typically as Vikings fans, we're used to seeing a situation where they gear up, they make it to the NFC Championship, they blow it, and then they fall apart, right? 98, 99, that season was bad. Granted, they did make the NFC Championship in 2001. They lose 41-0, and then they don't make it back till 2009. 2010, you have almost the exact same team with Favre, but that season is a mess. You don't make it back until 2017. I guess I applaud Spielman and Zimmer for bucking that trend, but you're right. I mean, the window of opportunity is not going to stay open forever. I've seen articles arguing that there's two windows: the window through next season, and then the window till 2023, since we have a lot of our core players locked down on contracts till then. But most of these guys are in their athletic prime right now, so one could argue that Xavier Rhodes is kind of the canary in the coal mine there. He's only 29 years old, but the mileage starts to pile up real quick when you get around 30. And so imagining some of these guys in 2023, that window is going to be real rickety at that point, using Viagra and whatnot by football standards. During the Lions game, I was laughing in our live chat because they were referring to Danny Amendola like he was 100 years old and he was 33. I'm 35. Yikes. Randy's 60. Wow. That's awesome. That's how old my dad is. You're younger than him, but oh man, that means I applaud not only your ability to navigate the internet at your age, and I'm just giving you shit, but that you're still actively invested in this team at your age, because you've seen some things, man. I like to pretend like, I'll tell it's a really quick aside here, and I'm not trying to garner sympathy or anything, but when I'm sober. I'm sober for almost 7 years. I went to treatment in 2014. I was diagnosed with PTSD at that point. That's where purple PTSD came from. One of my best friends is a therapist, and we thought it was a funny joke once I had that diagnosis. It's not a slight at all, but it's kind of a laughter is the best medicine thing. And a lot of the time, people assume that because I have PTSD that I was in the military. So like online, I get a lot, especially in the beginning, emails saying that was an inappropriate name for a website, and then I would say, well, I have PTSD, so I'm not like ragging on people, and then they would say thank you for your service, and then I would be like, I wasn't in the military. So when I'm here complaining about the Vikings, and you're 60, I haven't seen what you've seen, and I can't. It's the same thing with not being like people in the military that have PTSD. I feel like they've seen some stuff, right? I haven't seen that stuff, and I haven't seen in person what you've seen. I mean, my dad was at, and I feel like this. Everybody in your generation says they were at this game, but my dad was legitimately at the push-off game, the whiskey bottle to the ref's head game. Actually, Joe Oberly, who I do Morning Joes with, is your age, and he was at that game as well, and maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but it was he knows who threw that whiskey bottle, bar none. Like, he knows who did it. I always thought it was like, you probably don't get this reference, maybe Tang does, but the movie Rookie of the Year, where that kid breaks his arm, then his tendons are too tight, so he can throw like a 300-mile-per-hour fastball. There's a scene where the Cubs are terrible, and there's a home run. He has to pick the ball up and then throw it back, because the opposing team obviously hit the home run, and it was like, throw it back, and he throws it, and it's like a straight line to the catcher from the outfield, and it like hurts the catcher's hand. I always thought of like maybe a young spry guy throwing that whiskey bottle, because the ref was running full speed down the field, and somehow he threw it from the stands and hit him right in the head in stride. I always thought maybe there was like some hidden gem, like maybe it was Tommy Kramer, and that like they should have pulled him from the stands and had him play for the next season. I don't know. I'm telling you that. Anyway, what was my original point? Oh yeah. Tang, if you're still here, Tang says there's too many issues to solve. Left side of the O-line, DTs, and DBs. I glanced at it. I was going to ask you what team you're referring to. I can tell you're referring to the Vikings. I think the tackles had a good game, but I don't want to put too much on, like you said in your previous comment, going against Blau. You're at home. He's not necessarily getting rid of the ball quickly. you pile up 5 sacks, so on and so forth. But I guess again, I have to find some optimism because I don't want the season to end. I don't want it to be the off season. I have a lot of fun during the season, despite all the evidence to the contrary. But I do think that the DTs played better. I've always liked Jaleel Johnson. I don't know if he's obviously the answer. I really in the preseason thought Hercules Matafa might be a sneaky, like, really really big, like, breakout player of the year. When he was in college, he was one of 2 guys that scored above an 85 on both, like in PFF grades, in both his run and pass coverage, or pass rush. And obviously the problem with him is his size, but he was a dominant force in college, and I thought maybe with all the size and strength and attention taking around him in Linval and Everson and Daniel Hunter being next to Linval, that maybe he could win one-on-one matchups and really raise hell back there. But I think that obviously, I mean, if you put a gun to my head and said what position should they pick next year, the first round, I would say 3 tech. I really wonder what would have happened if Sharif Floyd never had gotten injured. Or if they still had Sheldon Richardson this year. But again, I mean, the DBs being a weak spot, I guess I'm just, again, I'm encouraged that at least they're making changes. And that they have a first round pick there, and Holton Hills looked okay, but they're not going to be a shutdown defense. We can't rely on that. We're going to have to score a lot of points. And the good news in that regard is that Thielen should be back. If he's not 100%, I would say, honestly, if you don't need to use him, don't against the Chargers. You don't know that till you're in that game. But if they're up by, 14 at halftime or something, I wouldn't even play him in the second half. They need him for the playoffs because they're going to need to score 30-some points a game. They're going to be on the road. It's just, so we'll see what happens. But again, I'm encouraged that they started the rotation and that it would have been even more, or I guess less. There would have been less roads if not for the injury to Hughes. Dalvin Cook came out of the game healthy too. There was no setbacks there. He sounded pretty good to the media. He said it's a physical game, that he's never going to be 100% at this point in the season, but I think he'll be fine. And that's obviously a really good sign. But we'll see what's going on. Yeah. Tank says that Holton Hill looks rusty because they won't play him. I don't know. I mean, he should be rusty. He missed 8 games, and he's really not gotten a lot of time since he's been back, for whatever reason. That surprises me a little bit because Zimmer really, and he's made this clear, I think that his favorite trait in corners is length. He always talks about not size, but length. So longer arms, so on and so forth. And I think that is one of the issues that you would have in having Hughes over Rhodes. Again, I'm not advocating for Rhodes being out there at all, but he's a good 4 or 5 inches shorter. And so, I was thinking about writing an article, and this is probably going to get murdered, but I want your guys' take on this, about how much the Vikings have missed Marcus Sherrills and a guy like Cordero Patterson in their kick and punt return situations. We haven't had hardly any, there's been no positive returns from Hughes in the punt game. Maybe 5 or 10 yards here or there, but by no means anywhere near what Sherrills was doing. And obviously Patterson was amazing returning kicks. And what I like about Sherrills, and what made me think about him in this instance, was that I really think that if he had been the size of Xavier Rhodes, he would have been like the best corner in the NFL. If you think about when he played actual corner, he was always in amazing position. He was just so small that the ball was just an inch or two out of his reach. But he played his form, all of it was perfect, and it got me to thinking with the road situation, like having Cheryl's back on this team for the playoffs would not be the worst idea because you could go to him if you needed him. Again, a lot of the time you just throw over the top of him, but at least he'll be in position to make a tackle. He won't get beat down the field. He might give up chunk yardage, but no yard after the catch. And he'll be able to actually perhaps pick up some points in the punt return game, or at least especially with Zimmer and how important field position is to this offense. At least improve that a little bit. I know Hughes is rusty as well, but God, we've missed that. Missed it a lot. Oh, there's a girl here. Now I'm nervous. Tang just said the coaches will get too cute in the playoffs and lose the game. Yeah, I don't even know why I'm going through all these piece by piece things. Well, if they do this, then this might happen, and don't worry because of this. And Thielen is healthy. I'm sure will be matched up against the Packers in the first round, and Zimmer will come out and we'll be doing like a human pyramid on defense for some reason, or some choreographed move from Cats. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to talk myself into thinking positively and getting excited, but I don't know. Anyway, I did write an article today that rehashed a lot of stuff that we've talked about in regards to Cousins, and it's going to be the final part of my, what is it now, octilogy, 8 articles that follow kind of how fans are reacting to Cousins. And I think Randy and Tang, you'll enjoy it. It's really long, though. I compared it to The Irishman on Netflix. You might need to take a break here or there. Read it over the course of a week. It's like a Daniel Steele novel. Basically, it's about, and Randy, you might have insight on this because you're not of my generation, so you might see things differently, but I'm 35, and for the most part in my life, I apologize for being repetitive, so I'll kind of breeze through this, but we haven't had a franchise guy. Culpepper was close. That didn't work out. Teddy could have been, perhaps. That didn't work out. Brad Johnson, maybe. Had he not gotten injured, then Randall Cunningham came in, and then they got rid of Brad Johnson, and then he came back. But I feel like this, regardless of whether or not you agree on how the numbers and the win-loss record this season has happened, it has happened. And I think the game yesterday, despite not being a huge, flashy game, solidified this idea for me, and it's that it's a very strange thing to see people that are my age or younger who have never had a franchise quarterback break their back explaining away the fact that we have one now that we can maybe look at for the next up to 10 years if he plays into his early 40s, like a lot of guys are doing. He's made a ton of money. I don't know if he would do that. Maybe he'll be chasing a ring. I don't know. But point being, he's not in the twilight of his career like a lot of the guys were, like Jeff George or Randall Cunningham or Donovan McNabb or Brett Favre, so on and so forth. And so it really just breaks down. Bleacher Report had a tweet up from somewhere. It's in the article. And it talked to scouts from the NFC East, the AFC in general, and the AFC South about their thoughts on Cousins. And it was a lot of really high praise. Like, he's a top 5 guy. Physically, look at his numbers. He's obviously elite, that sort of thing. And I just wanted to try to dissect maybe why people are doing that. And then also just kind of put my foot down and say, this guy is the franchise, and we have to accept that. Because believe it or not, and I found this out, and I don't want to cite too many examples because it would hurt us as a brand, but I've talked to the team before, and regularly, and I get press releases, and I've talked to players, and I've talked to people around players, And I mean, Chad Greenway's a good example. When he first came on my podcast, Luke Brun, who I mentioned earlier, who is the host of his own show on Locked On, the Locked On Network, he does Locked On Vikings. Um, he used to, in Greenway's last couple seasons, he really did not like Greenway. Not personally, he just thought he was over the hill and kind of would go on these rants about it, write articles about it. And so after Luke left to do the Locked On thing, Chad came on Morning Joe's and he was like, I'm glad to be on your show. It's nice to be on your site now that that guy that doesn't like me is gone. And I was like, you were aware of that? Like, what? There's just the team itself pays attention and the players themselves pay attention. And I think that even before social media and stuff, the team would have never traded Randy Moss if it thought there would be major backlash. And they knew there wasn't because people bought into this narrative of all this off the field stuff being somehow a detriment to the team, despite the fact that he was the best wide receiver in league history, and he did things for this team that I don't even think people would understand at this point. Like, we would be talking about the Los Angeles Vikings right now or the San Antonio Vikings if Randy Moss wasn't drafted. First of all, second of all, he single-handedly saved how many blackouts? Remember back when they would be like, there's 10,000 tickets left, and if they don't sell them, we're not going to be able to watch it on TV. But they traded him, and granted, it was right before the whale spotted. I think McCombs did it as a middle finger to Moss himself, but they wouldn't have done that. He wouldn't have done that if he thought that people would think that he was a bad guy. I think he's very vain that way. I cannot stand Red McCombs. And I don't think that Cousins will sign an extension here if he feels like people just hate him. And I feel like while that wouldn't be the number one reason for his decision, it could contribute to it. Beyond that, I just think in terms of debating football on the internet and covering the team, it's just silly that we have to keep revisiting this issue. You know what I mean? Like, you don't see that with other teams as much. With established quarterbacks, where it's a constant week to week. Well, sure, with this moving narrative, well, he sucks because he hasn't beat good teams. Well, he's beating good teams, but is he doing it by himself? Is he putting the team on his shoulders? Sure, he's putting the team on his shoulders, but let's wait till the playoffs. Like, it's just really kind of frustrating, to be honest, because the reason I've written this many articles is because it's the number one thing people talk about in general. When I'm at the liquor store and I see Vikings fans, I still hear comments about Case Keenum constantly. They should have never got rid of Case Keenum. You know, like, what? Case Keenum has been benched two times in 2 years by two different teams. You think Vikings fans of all people would realize we can't catch lightning in a bottle twice? To have a guy like Keenum, who is a journeyman backup, perform to that level, it wasn't going to happen again. I can't go into an alternate reality and say that for sure, but I'm almost guaranteeing it. Beyond that, I think the fact that he did perform to that level was more of a testament to the quality of talent around him, and more of an argument as to why you should have brought in Cousins in the first place, because Cousins can go through 4 progressions, make checkdowns. He's not as tethered to 1 or 2 things like Keenum was. You can open up the whole playbook. You can add new wrinkles. You can take advantage of guys like Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, which we saw last year to start the season. Thielen and Cousins were on fire. He almost broke the NFL record for 100-yard games to start the season. He ended up tying Megatron. But how many times, even in games they won, did you see Thielen wide open down the field, but Keenum was checking down to whomever, Kyle Rudolph, mostly. And so, yeah, I'm kind of sick of talking about it, despite the fact that I'm always talking about it. And so I just wanted to say, here's all the articles I've written about it this season. Here's the final article. I'm sure it'll come up. You know, I almost have this really strong feeling they will get too cute in the playoffs, you guys, and then they'll lose, but people will blame it on Cousins. And maybe I'm arguing with people, like the people that bring up Keenum that don't follow things that closely. They just look at, well, Keenum was successful and made it to the NFC Championship, and Cousins didn't. And the team's exactly the same, just the only difference is the quarterback, which isn't true. I mean, Keenum had a way better offensive line than Cousins had last year. But I'm hoping that will be. I mean, we're obviously going to talk about Cousins, but not in that line of reasoning. So I'll look at some of your final comments. And someone named Taylor Bose Johnson said it's my best article ever. She might be biased. I might be biased. I don't know. Randy lives in Houston. He liked Keenum, but he thinks Cousins was the right move. I knew there's a reason that you were here. Yeah, Warren Moon is another one I was thinking about. When I was younger, I remember Warren Moon coming here. He did great here for a while, but he was old, past his prime. Tank says coaches will hold back teams. Look at the Cowboys right now, biggest example. Along with the Browns. Yeah, the Cowboys are like last year's Vikings. They have a lot of talent. They're really underperforming. I think that Jerry Jones has kept Garrett around this long because I think subconsciously he realizes that most coaches don't want to go there. I know a lot of people are saying Urban Meyer will go there. I would be surprised if that happened. He is such a detriment to that team. He doesn't realize it. He doesn't realize that the only reason that they have they were in disarray when he bought them. I applaud that. I applaud what he's done, making them a global brand, and their value is through the roof. And so they're one of the most valuable franchises in all of sports. I get that, but in terms of just of what the team has done on the field, that the dynasty in the '90s, he worked his hardest to destroy that. First of all, that only happened because of us. Because the Vikings made the worst trade in NFL history and gave them essentially all the players they needed to complete that amazing roster. I mean, the offensive linemen they got, I think they got Emmitt Smith from it. They gave them so much for Herschel Walker, it's insane. I mean, free agency was still a relatively new concept at this point, and they traded so many picks, and so they have that. Then they have Jimmy Johnson, and he gets run out of town by Jerry Jones. And then they win again with, what's his name, Barry Schweitzer. And then he gets run out of town, and Jerry Jones is doing press conferences after the game, and he's always on the sideline. No respectable coach would want to go there. I can't imagine they'd want someone that's the owner and the GM, and that's, it's just ish. And so I can see why people would be frustrated there. I can see why Jerry Jones is frustrated, but he doesn't realize his role in it. But they have a lot of talent on that roster, and it seems like the players are checking out on Garrett. But I mean, what do you do? It's been such a weird season for them too. You win 3, you lose 3. Now they're on another 3-game losing streak. It's just weird. Tang said the '90s Cowboys could have been one of the greatest dynasties if they kept Jimmy Johnson. That's true, and they already are one of the best dynasties, strangely enough. I mean, how you rank those things it can be subjective, but even if you try to do it objectively, it's subjective in how you find what metrics you choose. But yeah, they had everything that they could have needed. They were winning those Super Bowl games by like 40, 50 points, and this was before all the changes that Jim Irsay made because he couldn't stop the freaking Patriots, the owner of the Colts, and turned the league into kind of arena football with all the changes to defensive holding, so on and so forth. I remember watching them against the Steelers, and Deion Sanders was playing wide receiver at the end of the game, and it was just absolute destruction. I mean, you went from my childhood, my first memories of football were of the 49ers, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, then Steve Young. So I was a big 49ers fan as a kid. My parents have this weird emotional attachment to San Francisco because they had their honeymoon there, and my dad always loved the Oakland A's. And my dad used to call me Sapolo for Jesse Sapolo, and he would make me block. And then you had those Cowboys, and they should have won more than they even did. But like you guys said, it's all on Jerry Jones. So I take great pleasure in that. By the way, I hate the Cowboys. I mean, the team I actually hate the most is the Saints. I hate the Packers because they're the Packers and we're supposed to, but I actually viscerally hate the Saints, and I almost hate them more because of that, because they're not our rival traditionally. It's not something you're raised on. It's something just based on the hatred of Sean Payton and what they did to win in 2009. I actually made an article because I was seeing a lot of revisionist history online with Saints fans, and they were basically saying, "Oh, we were kind of over exaggerating what happened in 2009." So I went through the whole game. I had gifs for every single late hit on Favre, and I just basically put them in this article. And when we switched purplePTSD to a new server, I lost that article. I'm gonna rewrite it. It's going to take me some time to go through that game and get all the late hits, but I'm going to rewrite it this week, and I'll share it with you guys. So I'll leave the show at that. We've got a good 45 minutes. That should help with the Google algorithm. Maybe get me to 20 views on this. Going viral! My left stroke just went viral. I appreciate you guys stopping by. Randy grew up in South Minneapolis, and he moved down there from 2005, but he was there when Keenum played. I went to South High School, so let me actually, if I can find it, I just had this hat on, and I'm trying to hide what my apartment looks like. Actually, I'll just, where did I leave it? There it is. No, that isn't it. All right, I'll wear it next time. But yeah, I went to South High School. That's in 2002. I'll have my leather jacket on too. Next time. But yeah, I live over by Lake Nokomis. So when I refer to the liquor store, it's McDonald's Liquor, which is by Oxendale's. You probably know where that is if you're a Southside guy. But thanks again, guys, for tuning in. Tang, if you wanted to email me and maybe I missed it, I'll check my spam folder. But I want to send you one of those Don't Get Too Cute shirts for Christmas, and I'll be back tomorrow working on some guest appearances. I don't know how that's going to work, but we'll figure it out. But thanks for tuning in yet again, and check out that article if you guys have time. And for the other people watching this video, if you feel free to join the conversation. I know we're kind of closely knit here, but we're always looking for new people, and there's actually a lot of people that are watching this, surprisingly, so that's cool. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I will